The cold night air bit at Zara Willis's bruised skin as she stumbled through the desolate Wyoming landscape, her torn dress providing little protection against the autumn chill of 1877. Blood trickled down her temple, each drop a bitter reminder of the men who had taken everything from her: her money, her dignity, and nearly her life before leaving her for dead miles from the nearest town. She had been traveling west on the stagecoach, fleeing a past in Boston that had become unbearable after her father's death left her at the mercy of creditors. The stage had been attacked just outside of Laramie, and when the robbers discovered she carried nothing of value, their disappointment had turned to violence. Zara's vision blurred as she struggled to place one foot in front of the other. In the distance, a small light flickered, perhaps a homestead or ranch. It was her only hope. With each agonizing step, the light grew closer, wavering like a mirage in her fading consciousness. The last thing she remembered was collapsing on rough wooden steps, the sound of a door creaking open, and strong arms lifting her as if she weighed nothing at all. When Zara awoke, she found herself in an unfamiliar bed, the coarse sheets smelling of lye soap and sunshine. Every inch of her body ached, but someone had tended to her wounds. Clean bandages wrapped her ribs, and a cool cloth rested on her forehead. "You're awake." The deep voice startled her. A tall man stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the morning light. He stepped forward, revealing broad shoulders, a weathered face, and eyes as blue as a summer sky. "Been out for 2 days. Thought I might have to fetch the doctor from town." Who are you?" Zara croaked, her throat parched and raw. "Mason Vance," he replied, crossing the small room to pour water from a pitcher. "Found you half dead on my porch." He helped her sit up, supporting her with a strong hand behind her back as she drank. "You got a name?" "Zara Willis," she whispered after drinking greedily. "Thank you for helping me." Mason nodded curtly, his expression guarded. "You're safe here. Rest now. We'll talk when you're stronger." Over the next few days, Zara drifted in and out of consciousness. Sometimes she woke to find Mason changing her bandages with surprisingly gentle hands for a man so rugged. Other times, she opened her eyes to an empty room, hearing only the distant sounds of cattle and the creaking of the windmill outside. When she finally gained enough strength to stay awake for more than a few minutes, Mason brought her a bowl of stew that smelled heavenly after days of broth. "Strong enough to tell me what happened?" he asked, settling into a chair beside the bed. Zara took a deep breath and recounted the stagecoach robbery, the brutal attack, and her desperate journey through the night. Mason listened silently, his jaw tightening as she described the men who had hurt her. "Sounds like the Hadley gang," he said when she finished. "They've been terrorizing these parts for months. Sheriff can't seem to catch them." "They took everything I had," Zara admitted, shame coloring her cheeks. "I have nothing to repay your kindness." Mason shrugged. Wasn't looking to be paid. Just did what anyone would do. But Zara knew better. Not everyone would take in a stranger, tend their wounds, and feed them without question. "You're welcome to stay until you're healed," Mason continued, standing to take her empty bowl. "Then I can take you to town, help you find work or passage east if that's what you want." "I have nowhere to go," Zara confessed, tears welling in her eyes despite her efforts to hold them back. "I left nothing behind in Boston but debts and bad memories." Something flickered in Mason's eyes, understanding, perhaps, or recognition of a kindred spirit. "Then you can stay longer, until you figure things out." He paused at the door. "I could use help around the ranch anyway, if you're willing." As the days passed, Zara's strength gradually returned. She began with small tasks: cooking meals, mending clothes, keeping the cabin tidy. Mason's home was modest but solid, a 2-room cabin with a separate barn and corral where he kept his horses. He ran cattle on the surrounding land with the help of just one ranch hand, a grizzled older man named Thomas who lived in town and rode out daily. Mason rarely spoke of himself, but Thomas was more forthcoming. When he joined them for dinner one evening, he told Zara that Mason had come west after the war, a decorated Union cavalry officer who wanted nothing more than to leave the fighting behind. He'd built the ranch from nothing, working the land with a determination that bordered on obsession. "Never seen a man work so hard to forget," Thomas had remarked, earning a sharp look from Mason that ended the conversation. As autumn deepened into winter, Zara found herself watching Mason when he wasn't looking, the way his hands worked skillfully with rope and leather, how his eyes crinkled at the corners on the rare occasions he smiled, the quiet strength evident in everything he did. One morning in early December, Zara woke to find the world transformed by the first heavy snowfall. Mason was already outside, clearing paths to the barn and chopping extra firewood. She prepared a hearty breakfast and brought him a steaming cup of coffee as he worked. "You'll freeze out here," she chided, wrapping her shawl tighter around her shoulders. Mason paused, leaning on his axe. "Been doing this for years without anyone fussing over me." "Well, now someone is," Zara replied, surprising herself with her boldness. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Guess I could get used to it." That evening, as wind howled around the cabin's sturdy walls, they sat before the fire sharing a bottle of whiskey. The amber liquid warmed Zara from within, loosening her tongue and her inhibitions. "Do you ever get lonely out here?" she asked, watching firelight dance across Mason's face. He considered the question before answering. "Used to think I preferred it that way, being alone." His eyes met hers. Not so sure anymore. Something shifted between them that night, a door opening to possibilities neither had dared acknowledge before. The next morning, Zara woke to find Mason already gone, his side of the cabin neat as always. A note on the table explained he'd ridden to a neighboring ranch to help with a sick horse and wouldn't return until evening. Restless without his presence, Zara decided to bake bread and prepare a special dinner. As she worked, she hummed a tune her mother had taught her long ago, before consumption had taken her when Zara was just 12. For the first time in years, memories of her mother brought comfort rather than pain. When Mason returned, snow-covered and weary, the cabin was warm and fragrant with cooking smells. His eyes widened at the sight of the table set with his mother's china, which Zara had found carefully packed away in a trunk. "What's all this?" he asked, removing his coat. "Just wanted to thank you," Zara said, suddenly shy. "For everything." They ate by candlelight, and Mason spoke more than he ever had before, telling her about his childhood in Pennsylvania, his time in the war, and his dream of building something lasting on this wild frontier. Zara shared stories of her father's bookshop in Boston, her love of literature, the scandal that had forced her to flee east when her father's business partner had tried to force her into marriage to settle debts. After dinner, Mason helped her clear the dishes, their hands brushing occasionally, each touch sending warmth through Zara's body. When the last plate was dried and put away, they stood facing each other in the small kitchen, the air between them charged with unspoken feelings. "Zara," Mason began, his voice rough with emotion. "I'm not good with words." But she didn't let him finish. Rising on tiptoe, Zara pressed her lips to his, a gentle question. For a heartbeat, Mason remained still, then his arms encircled her waist, pulling her closer as he deepened the kiss. That night, they discovered each other slowly, learning the language of touch and desire in the shelter of Mason's narrow bed. Zara gave herself freely, finding in Mason's arms a passion she had never known existed. Afterward, as they lay tangled together, snow falling softly outside, she felt a sense of belonging she had never experienced before. Winter passed in a haze of quiet happiness. Days were filled with work caring for livestock in the bitter cold, maintaining the ranch despite the harsh weather, but nights belonged to them alone. In the intimacy of darkness, they shared their bodies and their dreams, building something precious in the wilderness. As spring approached, Zara began experiencing morning sickness. At first, she dismissed it as a lingering winter illness, but as the symptoms persisted, she could no longer deny the truth. She was carrying Mason's child. Fear gripped her heart. What would he say? Would he send her away? Many men wanted no part of family life, especially in this untamed territory where survival demanded everything a person had. She kept her secret for weeks, until one morning when Mason found her retching behind the cabin. "You've been sick for days," he said, helping her back inside. "I'm riding for the doctor." "No," Zara caught his arm. "I'm not sick, Mason. We're going to have a child." His face went blank with shock, and for a terrible moment, Zara thought she had been right to fear his reaction. Then, to her astonishment, Mason dropped to his knees before her, pressing his face against her still flat stomach. "A child," he whispered, his voice thick with wonder. Our child. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the newly green prairie, Mason took her hand. Marry me, Zara, he said simply. Be my wife, raise our child with me. I know I'm not the man you probably dreamed of, but I'll spend every day trying to deserve you. Tears filled Zara's eyes. You already are that man, Mason. Yes, I'll marry you. They were wed 2 weeks later in the small church in Laramie, with Thomas standing as witness. The preacher raised an eyebrow at Zara's condition, which was becoming noticeable, but said nothing as he pronounced them husband and wife. Spring brought new life to the ranch calves in the pastures, wildflowers on the prairie, and the quickening of the child in Zara's womb. Mason worked from dawn until dusk, expanding the cabin to add a proper bedroom and nursery, determined to provide a fitting home for his growing family. One afternoon in late May, as Zara hung laundry in the warm sunshine, she spotted a cloud of dust on the horizon. Riders were approaching 5 men, moving fast. Her heart raced with foreboding. Mason and Thomas were checking fence lines on the far side of the property. She would have to face whatever was coming alone. Hurrying inside, Zara retrieved the shotgun Mason had taught her to use during the winter. With trembling hands, she loaded it and returned to the porch, one hand resting protectively over her swelling belly. As the riders drew closer, Zara recognized the leader, a man with a vicious scar across his cheek. One of the men who had attacked her on the stagecoach. The Hadley gang had returned. Well, look what we have here, boys, the scarred man called as they reined in before the cabin. Our little runaway, all settled in and breeding. His cold eyes took in her condition with cruel amusement. Get off this property, Zara commanded, raising the shotgun. My husband will be back any minute. The men laughed. Husband, is it? Moved up in the world, haven't you? The leader dismounted, seemingly unconcerned about the weapon aimed at his chest. We're not here for you, darling. Just passing through and thought we'd pay a neighborly visit. Maybe your husband would like to contribute to our travel fund. There's nothing for you here, Zara said, her finger tightening on the trigger. The man took another step forward. That's not very hospitable. And after we let you live last time. A shot rang out, but not from Zara's gun. The scarred man howled as a bullet tore through his shoulder. Mason appeared from behind the barn, rifle raised, with Thomas flanking him. Next one goes through your head, Mason called, his voice deadly calm. Back away from my wife. The wounded man staggered back toward his horse, cursing. This ain't over, Vance. It is for today, Mason replied, advancing steadily. Ride out now, or none of you will leave here alive. Something in his tone, the cold certainty of a man who had seen battle and wasn't afraid to kill again, convinced the outlaws. They retreated, half dragging their wounded leader onto his horse. We'll be back, one shouted as they rode away. With more men, Mason was at Zara's side in an instant, checking her for injuries. Are you hurt? The baby. We're fine, she assured him, though her legs trembled so badly she had to lean against him. They didn't touch me. Mason's face was grim. They'll be back. Those men don't forget. That night, after Thomas had ridden to town to alert the sheriff, Mason and Zara lay awake, discussing what to do. The Hadley gang was notorious throughout the territory, and the law had proven ineffective at stopping them. We could leave, Zara suggested, though the thought of abandoning the home they'd made together broke her heart. Start over somewhere else. Mason was silent for a long time. This is our home, he finally said. I won't be driven off my land by men like that. He placed his hand on her rounded belly, feeling their child kick beneath his palm. But I won't risk you and the baby either. In the morning, Mason rode into town and returned with news. A posse was forming to hunt down the Hadley gang once and for all. The recent attack on a pregnant woman had been the final straw for the community. I'm joining them, Mason told Zara. Thomas will stay here with you, and I've asked some of the neighboring ranchers' wives to check in. It's time to end this. Zara wanted to argue, to beg him not to go, but she saw the determination in his eyes. This was the man she had married, one who would fight to protect what was his. Instead, she packed him provisions and kissed him goodbye, pressing her street Christopher medal into his hand for protection. Come back to us, she whispered against his lips. Always, he promised. The days of Mason's absence stretched into weeks. June arrived, bringing relentless heat and the growing discomfort of Zara's advancing pregnancy. Thomas kept guard faithfully, and the neighboring women visited regularly, bringing food and company, but Zara's worry for Mason consumed her thoughts. When she finally heard horses approaching one sweltering afternoon, she rushed to the porch, heart in her throat. Relief flooded her at the sight of Mason riding at the head of several men, dusty and exhausted but alive. He dismounted stiffly, favoring his left leg, and limped to her side. "It's done," he said simply. "The Hadley gang won't trouble anyone again." Later, after the other men had departed and Mason had bathed away the dust of the trail, he told her the full story. They had tracked the gang to a hideout in the mountains, where a fierce gun battle had ensued. 2 of the posse had been killed, and Mason had taken a bullet in the thigh, but the outlaws had been defeated. The scarred leader would hang in Cheyenne the following month. "I never wanted to kill again after the war," Mason confessed as Zara tended his wound. "But I'd do anything to keep you safe." "I know," she said softly. "That's why I love you." His eyes, haunted from the violence he had witnessed and participated in, softened at her words. "And that's what makes it bearable." As summer progressed, Mason's wound healed, and Zara's time grew near. They prepared the nursery together, Mason crafting a beautiful oak cradle while Zara sewed tiny garments from fabric ordered from the mercantile in town. On a scorching August night, Zara's labor began. Mason rode frantically for the midwife in town, returning with her just as dawn broke. Through the long, painful hours that followed, he remained by Zara's side, wiping her brow, holding her hand, and whispering encouragement. When their daughter finally entered the world with a lusty cry, Mason wept unashamedly. "She's perfect," he breathed, watching the midwife place the tiny, red-faced infant in Zara's arms. Just like her mother. They named her Sophia, after Mason's mother. She had her father's blue eyes and a dusting of dark hair that Zara was certain would turn as black as Mason's. Looking at her tiny features, Zara marveled at how much her life had changed in a year from desperate flight to profound happiness. As autumn returned to the Wyoming territory, the little family settled into a new rhythm. Mason built a rocking chair for the porch, where Zara would sit nursing Sophia while watching him work. The ranch prospered, with the cattle herd growing and plans for expansion in the spring. Word came from Boston that Zara's father's former business partner had died in disgrace, his fraudulent dealings exposed. A lawyer's letter informed her that, with debts settled, a small inheritance awaited her claim. The money would help secure their future, but Zara knew her true wealth resided in the family she had found on this wild frontier. One evening, as the first frost silvered the prairie grass, Mason joined Zara on the porch. Sophia slept peacefully in her mother's arms, her tiny fist curled around Mason's finger. "Sometimes I still can't believe this is real," Mason said, gazing at his wife and daughter with reverence. "That night, I found you on my porch. I never imagined where it would lead." "Do you remember what you told me when I first woke up?" Zara asked, leaning her head against his shoulder. "You said I was safe here." "I didn't believe it then, but it was the first true thing I'd heard in a long time." Mason placed a gentle kiss on her forehead. "I meant it then, and I mean it now. You'll always be safe with me, Zara. You and Sophia both." As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the vast Wyoming sky in shades of gold and crimson, Zara thought about the journey that had brought her here, the pain and loss that had ultimately led to such profound joy. The beating she had endured at the hands of the Hadley gang had nearly broken her, but in her darkest hour, she had found her way to Mason's door. "I love you, Mason Vance," she whispered, watching the stars begin to emerge in the darkening sky. "Thank you for taking me in when I had nothing." His arm tightened around her shoulders. "You had everything I needed," he replied. "I just didn't know it until you arrived." 5 years later, the Vance ranch had grown considerably. Additional buildings dotted the property, including a larger main house that Mason had built with the help of several hired hands. Sophia, now a spirited 5-year-old with her father's determined nature and her mother's quick mind, had been joined by 3-year-old twins, James and William, who kept the household in constant motion. Zara stood at the kitchen window, her hand resting unconsciously on her belly where their 4th child grew. Outside, Mason was teaching Sophia to ride her new pony, his patience infinite as he led the animal around the corral while their daughter giggled with delight. The land that had once seemed so harsh and unforgiving to Zara's eastern eyes now felt like the only home she could imagine. She had learned its rhythms and seasons, had witnessed its brutal beauty through blizzards and droughts, summer storms, and prairie fires. Like her marriage, it had demanded everything she had to give, but returned her efforts tenfold. As Mason lifted Sophia from the pony and swung her high in the air, Zara smiled, remembering the broken woman who had collapsed on a stranger's porch that fateful night. How far she had come, how much she had gained from what had seemed like the end of everything. Outside, Mason looked toward the house, catching her watching. Even at this distance, she could see his smile, the one reserved only for her. He set Sophia down and pointed toward the house, and their daughter came racing across the yard, pigtails flying. "Mama, did you see me riding?" Sophia burst through the door, her face flushed with excitement. "I did, sweetheart," Zara replied, bending to embrace her. "You're becoming quite the horsewoman." Mason followed, the twins trailing behind him like faithful puppies. "Just like her mother," he said, meeting Zara's eyes over their daughter's head. "Brave enough to take on anything." That night, after the children were asleep, Mason and Zara sat on the porch of their home, just as they had countless nights before. His arm around her shoulders, her head resting against him, they watched the vast canopy of stars wheel overhead in comfortable silence. "You know," Mason said finally, "I've been thinking about that night I found you. How close I came to not hearing you fall on those steps." Zara looked up at him. "What do you mean?" "I'd been planning to ride to town that evening, stay the night," he explained. "Changed my mind at the last minute. If I hadn't—" He didn't finish the thought. "Then I believe we were meant to find each other," Zara said simply. "Some things are just meant to be." Mason had never been one for sentimentality or talk of destiny, but as he looked at the woman beside him, the woman who had brought light and life to his solitary existence, he found himself nodding. "I think you're right," he agreed, pulling her closer as a cool evening breeze swept across the prairie. "Some things are just meant to be." Behind them, their home stood solid against the wilderness, filled with the sleeping children who represented their shared future. Before them stretched the vast, open country that had tested them, challenged them, and ultimately rewarded their perseverance with a life richer than either could have imagined. And as the moon rose over the Wyoming territory, Zara Willis Vance, once beaten and abandoned, rested securely in the arms of the man who had not only taken her in, but had given her a family, a home, and a love that had healed them both.